We'll be in Colossians 3:18 to 4:6 today. And we're talking about the gospel, how it should affect our relationships today. God's wired each and every one of us to relate to each other. There are some people who like to be alone. There are some hermits. There are those who want to be, as I watched that Alaskan show, in the wilderness by themselves. But for the most part, most of us are wired to be related to one another. We have to do life together, don't we? As a matter of fact, I don't like being by myself all the time. I like it sometimes, but not all the time. I like to be around people. I like to communicate with people. I like to have fun with people. I like to do life with my friends and with my church family. You see, we do life together with family and friends. Co-workers. How much time do we spend with co-workers compared to our family? And then church members. We all try to do life together and live life together. And how can we live together? When we look at, as far as trying to get along that, how do we live life together? We all have different views. We all get angry. There's certain things that not tick us off. There's certain things that maybe our spouses do that we don't like, and all these different things. There's things that people say to us. There's a lot of different division in the world today in the United States of America. But what's the common thread in all our relationships? What should the common thread be in all our relationships to one another? It should be love. And sometimes it's hard to practice the love in relationships, Being the individuals that we are today, some of us are hard-headed. Some of us are, they call, set in their ways. Some of us we have to get our minds right, Get your mind right. We know that it takes a lot of work to have love in relationships today. There's not many of us who want to really be lone rangers in life today. So we look at today's lesson about how our relationship with Christ should affect all of our relationships, even the people that we disagree with very vehemently in the world today. Those who don't see things the way we see things today. But we'll see in today's lesson how Christ should affect our relationship with others that we are around today. Are you more loving today? Because of Christ, are you more loving? Are you more tolerant? Are you more compassionate today? As we see in today's lesson, living out the gospel, sometimes a hard thing to do in family, at work, at home, and in the world in which we live today. Let's look at these verses today and see what he has to say to us. Like I said, it seems like I always get stuck with this verse here every time I'm up here and it's time for the Sunday school lesson when it says, "Wives," in verse 18, "submit yourselves to your husband as is fitting in the Lord." I always get that verse. I don't know why do you think I get that verse all the time?
Like the Lord said, He's trying to tell you something.
Well, I wonder what He's trying to tell me. I've been hard.
The important verse is 19.
That's right.
Okay. So let me ask you this. What type of husband should a wife submit to? I'm giving you all a chance, ladies. What type of husband should a wife submit to? I've kind of changed it around, didn't I?
A loving husband.
A loving husband. Anybody else?
Husband
Sympathetic.
A sympathetic husband.
Husband of faith.
Jerry?
Godly.
Okay. Anybody else? What type of husband? Now we all got to realize, people change. Frankie, I'm almost going to give you a chance. Okay.
I was going to say one that doesn't have a temper, right?
A temper?
Right, Sherry?
A husband that doesn't provoke his wife to throw him off the deck.
Okay, there's a message in that for me somewhere, I guess. But you know what happened? And I don't know how to explain it, but all of us change over the years, don't we? You remember the person that you walked down the aisle with? Huh? Did you ever think you could get mad at that person when I throw them off the deck? I remember John Wayne in a movie always asked the question, why does a woman always want to change a man? And we got all these things that as we try to live life together, and I asked you what type of husband should a wife submit to. Well, the principle is in verse 17, the verse that was right above that. If you look at that verse about how we should do all the things together. Matter of fact, he's talking about a voluntary submission. Not just unthinkable obedience. Not because the husband says, I said so. Has your husband ever told you because I said so is why you should do something?
Nope.
I don't know. Have I ever said that? I didn't have ever said that. I've said other things probably that I wish I wouldn't have said. Not the result of force. As a matter of fact, when he talks about submission, it's submission of an equal to an equal. How do y'all like that definition? An equal to an equal. Are you equal in your home? Do you have as much say over matters as your husband has? Are you co-equals in that regard? What do you ladies see your role in your family? What is your role? When you got married, did you have a specific role that you saw in your mind that was going to be your part when you got married? Huh? Did you know what your role was going to be?
Partners.
Okay, partners. In other words, if you were a lady who went out to work and you worked 8 hours, 10 hours a day, did you see your husband and your role is not doing all the housework? That your husband should help you do some of the things that you're out there working too?
Right.
I think the roles have kind of changed a little bit over the last 40 years than what they used to be.
There's different women stayed home. The women
Right.
stayed home, you know. They
I think we all, when we talk about a family today, how do we see ourselves? What role do we see ourselves as playing in the family today? What does your husband see your role as? Now, I asked you what your role was. What do you think your husband sees your role as? Is it anything different from what you see your role as being? Well, I say that's probably sometimes a vast difference as we live life today. As a matter of fact, what's he talking about here? He's talking about us coming to a reasonable treaty, because he said, as is fitting in the Lord. He wants us to be reasonable. A treaty, so to speak, between husband and wife. We're going to conquer this thing of life together. We're not going to see eye to eye on everything, but together we're going to find some type of solution, some type of common ground. That's what he's talking about here. As a matter of fact, he talks about Christians today should live above a higher order on a higher spiritual plane than the world does on the natural plane that they live on today. And that's enough about the wives. Let's go to verse 19. Husbands, love your wives and don't be bitter toward them. You know, I wonder why he said, husbands, don't be bitter towards your wives. I wonder why he specifically says that. Why do you think he says that?
You could be jealous.
Huh?
Jealous of their wife.
All right. Anybody else? Don't be bitter. He mentions about being bitter. You know, it's easy to get bitter towards one another by the smallest little things that someone might do, you know, in the family. I like to ask this question. Does any married man remember his marriage vows? What do you think, ladies? Does any married man remember his wedding vows?
Probably just as much as we do.
Huh?
I said probably just as much as we do. Not so much, maybe.
That question is because you live up to it.
I remember I said I do, but
Sherry remembers that part too.
I think I heard something about for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, and things like that in there.
Love and honor.
Huh?
Love and honor.
Was that in there?
Yeah.
Surely the rules have changed a little bit over the last few years. And I write the question, what am I to do? What do you want me to do? What am I to do as a husband? As a matter of fact, what he does, he gives two different kind of answers here in this one verse. First of all, he gives us a positive instruction. Love your wives. That's positive, isn't it? Huh? What does that look like if I love my wife? To bring her flowers every day? Or maybe once in a while? Or maybe once a year?
Twice a year.
You see, it gives us positive. This is a positive thing when it says to love your wife. And then he gives a negative instruction about don't be bitter. Now he says to love your wife. Love your wife when? When should I love my wife?
Every day. Every day.
My wife's got all the answers if y'all listen to her.
I do. You better listen to me.
How should I love my wife? What should be the goal of the husband?
In mine, it gives a cross-reference of Ephesians 4:3. It says, endeavoring to keep the unity and with peace in the home. That's not exactly that close.
You know what that's called? I'm to seek her highest good. But what gets in the way of me seeking my wife's highest good? Seeking my highest good. Doing things I might want to do. Expecting things that I almost got a vision of life when we get married, how things are going to work out. Nobody gets married and hopes not to live happily ever after, do they? Everybody ever there was walked down the aisle and got married, don't they expect to live happily ever after? Huh? Kind of a vision in how your marriage should be. We are to seek her highest good. Don't be bitter. We all face anger and disappointment in life, do we not? And sometimes I think men get more upset when they face disappointment, don't they? Things ain't exactly the way I want them to be. They're not working out the way I want it like to work out. I'm not earning the money that I thought I was going to earn. I'm not doing this. And sometimes when we get disappointed in life, maybe we think we're not being treated fairly in life. And you know what? If I'm not thinking being treated fairly at work, or something bad happens to me all day long, nothing goes right, here's what the verse really means. Don't take it out on me. How many times do we take it out on those that we love? Always? She said always. It's a lot. Because why? Because I think I can get away with it. You know what?
And they're supposed to love you no matter what.
That's right.
So you can just,
Yeah. I would say men lose their temper more readily than women. I don't know. Don't you think men lose their temper easier than women do?
Half and half.
Well, man, half and half. I'm coming up this last few years. I see my grandson lose his temper all the time. And you know what they say? He gets that from his grandpa. Never they get nothing bad from their grandma, but everything is bad they get from what?
Grandpa.
And there's a little bit of truth in that, you know, when we talk about tempers. Well, we all get the gist of that, what he's trying to say. Don't take it out on me. Don't think that your wife can make your world perfect. That she is going to be perfect. Bitterness does not happen suddenly, does it? Most of the time, bitterness happens over time. Leads to resentment. And it leads to us not getting along, and absolutely leads to a divorce a lot of the times.
But don't you think like bitterness is like when you do something for somebody that you don't do it because of love, you just somebody's coming to it, and then you just grumble the whole. That's bitterness, you know.
Grumbling's part of bitterness, yeah.
And if you do it out of love, that bitterness, I mean, sometimes you do that. You know, I do things because, and then I'll have to grumble on my garage or wherever. And, you know, but sometimes it's good that we need to do things out of love, not out of just, you know, look what I've done, you know, that kind of stuff, you know. And
I would think a lot of times it's harder to grin and bear it and not saying it. You know, I always learn, you know, if you want to have a happy marriage, you need to keep your mouth shut a lot of times. Some of y'all are nodding yes to that. But a lot of us don't want to. We want to make our opinion known or what we think about it. Sometimes we're better off keeping quiet about things. Let's go on to verse 20 and 21. I think we've hashed that out enough to get the gist of what Paul's saying to us today. We are imperfect people. Things don't turn out the way that they should. Relationships change. People have changed. And people change. They're not the person maybe that they once were. Look at verse 20 and 21. And now it goes to children. Children, obey your parents in everything, for this pleases the Lord. Fathers, do not exasperate your children so that they won't become discouraged. Now, we're to honor our parents all of our lives. But when we are children, we are to obey our parents. Here do we have, who's addressed in this verse 20 and 21? Is the mother addressed or is the father addressed? Who's addressed in this verse here, in these two verses? Huh?
Others.
Why do you think the father's addressed in these verses? Huh?
Head of the household.
What?
He's the head of the household.
Okay, so he's the head of the household.
Some mothers used to say, wait till your father comes home.
Yeah. Wait till your father comes home. Why you wait for me to come home? You take care of it.
You're the bad guy.
But he puts the father as the head, the father as the charge. Just remember when Adam and Eve were in the garden, even though it was Eve who was deceived and she was the first one to fall, who did God blame for the whole situation? He held Adam responsible. Adam was the head, whether we like it or not. Adam was the headship of the home. And we have the father or the dad's addressed here and not the mother. And as we see a lot of times when the fathers leave the home, or a lot of kids who don't have fathers, which is the biggest problem in America today, isn't it? The family, where the fathers are not staying around. And when you see a lot of times these athletes, who's with them on TV and who do they say hi to most of the time? They talk about their mothers, because their mothers, most of the time, unconditionally are going to love them, try to do all they can to take care of them and raise them. And most of the time it's the fathers that are addressed, because it's the fathers who leave the home and abandon the family. That's probably one of the biggest problems that we have in America today. He's talking about the fathers not leading a dictatorship, but leading a directorship. There's a difference between a dictator and a director in a home, don't you think? Now, there's certain things that I said as a dad, absolutely dogmatic about it. They weren't going to change. You don't talk to your mother and dad like that. That was a rule. First time my daughter talked back to me, I backhanded her. I think she said she hated me. That's before here. She said she hated me. I said, now you may hate me, but I don't want to hear you say it. Because we know that children are people too.
But Mike, it says there, children obey your parents. And that's where, and I know we joke about this, wait till your dad gets home. But that shouldn't be wait till your dad gets home, because that makes him the head. And it should be if you're obeying your parents, the parents should have equal disciplinary things. When the father is told all the time, wait till your dad gets home, he's going to take care of this. Mom becomes it's hands-on.
Well, here's the way it worked. When me and my wife worked, our rules stood whether we were home or not. When my children came home by themselves or before I got home, Mom and Dad's rules still stood, whether we were there or not. And my kids knew that. Didn't your children know that? That Mom and Dad's rules stood in the household? Not some of the time, but all the time, right? Those rules stood all the time. Children, obey your parents. They should obey us because why? We have their best interest at heart, don't we? We want them to grow up. We don't want them to get in trouble. We don't want them to get into drugs. We don't want them to get in alcohol. There's a lot of things that children get into. There's a lot of things that kids are into now at a very early age because they have no directorship at home. They don't have demands that are made upon them, rules to obey. And as Christian parents, we would not demand immoral or unchristian actions from our children, but those that would be godly actions. There are times that a child may disobey a parent when that parent may ask him to do something that's immoral or something that they know that is wrong. But he says for us to train. What type of training is he talking about? What type of direction should we be giving to our children today? Huh? Well, the thing that's missing today is religious education, is it not? Why do you think these things are happening the way they're happening today? Thou shalt not steal. Is that still a rule? Is that still a law? You shouldn't lie. We should train our kids in the fear and admonition of God, because God would be the ultimate one who needs to be the authoritative figure in their life. When my children grow up and move away or have their own homes, I'm no longer the authoritative figure in their lives. They're their own boss. But ultimately, I should talk to them who's the ultimate figure in their life. It should be the God in heaven, the Lord Jesus Christ. We see in our country today what happens when children have no training. They have no discipline. They have no demands for obedience in their life. You know, I've had to obey my whole life. I had to be at work at a certain time. I had to take lunch at a certain time. I had to punch out at a certain time. There were certain rules I had to follow and do things if I wanted to get a paycheck every week. You know that? And that was good for me to know, to be obedient to that. As parents, we are responsible for our children, not our adult child. I'm not responsible for my children's actions anymore. One of the best lines that's ever been quoted as saying from mom and dad is, because I said so. I bet we've all used that quote many times, because I said so. It's not an argument. It's not a dictatorship. But I'm the one in authority. Sometimes it's all I need to say is because I said so. I don't need to provide you with a big, long, drawn-out explanation of why things are done the way they're done in my household. Because my standard is that which pleases the Lord. Look at verse 22. Slaves, obey your human masters in everything. Don't work only while being watched as people pleasers, but work wholeheartedly, fearing the Lord. The question of slaves and masters may appear to be out of date in today's world and may not be applicable to the modern society in which we live. But there are many important principles for capital and for labor. We have two groups of people in America today. One is capital, those who are in charge, those who are bosses, and labor, those of us who are laborers today. And when this letter was penned to the Colossian Christians, it is estimated that slaves made up at least probably more than half of the population at that time in the world of the Roman Empire. As a matter of fact, slavery was a social status of you-know-who. Many professional people were slaves. Teachers, doctors, craftsmen. Even though they may have had no rights as citizens in the Roman Empire, they held great sway in the upbringing of Rome's children and doing a lot of different things that mom and dad didn't have time to do. Slaves had no rights. They existed for the convenience of their owners. And Paul didn't deal with the idea of slavery, but Paul dealt with the duty of slaves in a context of writing about family. because slaves were considered part of the Roman family at that time. When we look at the question of slaves and masters, that's not in our modern day way of thinking, because slavery is not condoned or practiced today. But the admonition to work hard as one was working for God is still in effect for us as Christians today. If we're an employee today, your job is to do what? As a Christian employee, what should my job be? Huh? What did my boss... Now listen, the places I worked, they knew I was a Christian. Sometimes they got on me, you know. Now I remember Wednesday I used to cook here, and I told them I'll work any overtime any day, but there's a certain Wednesday I got to cook. I'm cooking for Jesus on a Wednesday. But I heard one comment when I worked in one of the places I worked, where the guy said, the boss said, well, he's a Christian. And one guy, I heard a guy said, well, they make good workers, you know that? And that's just what I heard, a comment from two people I really didn't know that my boss might have knew. As a Christian, we should always try to do the best job that we can do. Paul said in everything, do the things that would please Christ. Now, he's not talking about illegal or immoral activities that my boss may ask me to do. My boss never asked me to do something that was illegal or immoral. You see, the issue is the integrity of one's heart. Is your heart in it? You see? As we look at verses 22 to 25, is your heart in it? You see, Christians, workers are to view their jobs as service not to their employer, but to who? To the Lord. I thought that always made a big difference for me. I always try to do the best that I could in a timely manner. Strong motivation to serve someone or work for someone is found in the future reward. What does he say here? Huh? Knowing that you will receive the reward of an inheritance from the Lord. You serve the Lord Christ. Motivation is that I'm serving God. I'll be rewarded in the future. I'm going to be rewarded for my service that I did for my company. You know that? You're going to be rewarded for the service that you did for your company. Now, normally we receive eternal rewards, we think, for spiritual things, right? For our spiritual practices. Bible reading, we receive a spiritual reward. That's a good thing to have Bible reading every day, isn't it? Prayer, giving, evangelism. But that's not what Paul's saying here. What's he saying here? He didn't list anything spiritual, he didn't list anything about prayer or giving or anything, but what did he list? He said that you will receive a reward of an inheritance from the Lord. You serve Christ. Because whatever you do, do it from the heart. As something done for the Lord and not for people. Paul's saying here that all work is done to honor Christ. And all work that's done and which honors Christ will bring a reward in our lives. You and I will give an account to God for our whole life, not just my spiritual life. I won't give an account for not just my spiritual life. I'll give an account for my whole life. I'll give an account about my faithfulness. Did I put my heart and soul into my job? Most of the time. There's some days I goofed off, you know. Was I faithful to my employer? Was I faithful to my church? Was I faithful to my home? Was I faithful to my pastor? And then lastly, was I faithful to my time off? How did I spend my time off? Remember, there's a lot of people who think, if nobody's watching me at work, what can I do? Huh? How many people try to get by with the least amount of what they want to do? That shouldn't be with the Christian, because God is always watching. And not only that, God said He has no favoritism. And that's something we need to look into. We're all going to be judged alike. You know, there were certain places that I worked where the boss had a favorite employee. You believe that, Cherry? You ever work in a place where it seemed like the boss had a favorite and they didn't get some of the nasty jobs I got? You know what? It seemed like they got some cleaner jobs and easier jobs. There were just certain people that the boss liked. It was kind of, I don't know if it was really outright favoritism, but they got kind of some of the easier jobs that I would like to have. You ever see that at work? I think you call them the boss's pet sometime. You've ever heard that terminology. That's not what God says here. God has no favorites, does he? Huh? God expects us all to do a good job. Well, what about my employer? What's his responsibility? What's the duty of the master? What's the duty of the employer? Verse 1, chapter 4. Master, deal with your slaves justly and fairly, since you know that you too have a master in heaven. Who's Paul talking about here? You know he's talking about Christians. You know there were Christian masters who owned slaves at that time in the world. People became Christians, and they still owned slaves at that time. But what was the duty of the master? What's the duty of the employer? You know everybody serves somebody, is what he's saying here. Who's the real master? Christ is the real master, and he lives in heaven today. Everybody serves somebody. He's saying here today, deal justly and fairly, or equally, just and equal. What is just and equal treatment as far as slaves or employees go today? Huh? So what's just treatment for employees? Anybody? What do you think is a just treatment of employees? Now, you can't give some employee something you don't have. I think I earn $100 an hour. I'm worth $100 an hour. Ain't that right? Huh? My employer don't have $100 an hour to give me. I cannot demand something that's impossible for my employer to do. It ought to be something that's just and equal. Should not demand more than can be expected. You've heard the term, you can't get blood out of a turnip, right? Employers have tremendous responsibility when they take on an employee. They will be judged how they treated their employees. And I'm not talking about the United States of America. I'm talking about worldwide employers and how they treated their people. Whether they're in China or wherever they're in Vietnam, everyone will be held accountable how they treat their employees. He talks about equal. Don't demand more from one employee than you do from the other employee. Don't demand that one person put out 20 units per hour and the other person only has to put out 10. Talks about us treating equal and justice. Paul is adamant about Christian conduct and Christian service. Whether you're an employer or an employee, whether you're a mom or whether you're a dad, whether you're a child, whether you're a husband, and whether you're a wife today. And look at it, verses 2 to 4. Paul doesn't just stop there. Paul was concerned about more areas of Christian conduct. In verses 2 to 4, he said, devote yourselves to prayer. Stay alert in it with thanksgiving. At the same time, pray also for us that God may open a door to us for the word to speak the mystery of Christ, for which I am in chains, so that I may make it known as I should. There's two words that go together here. When Paul says to pray and to do what? Stay alert. Or pray and watch. The King James says watch. These two words go together. He says to stay alert. We talk about how the Christian ought to respond in prayer. Now, y'all remember when Nehemiah was building that wall back and he was having trouble? And he asked his guys to do what? He asked them to pray, didn't he? What else did he ask them to do? He says, well, you take your weapon with you. You're to pray, but you're also to do what? He was very practical. It wasn't just prayer that he said to use, but it was practicality when he said, stay awake and watch. When they were rebuilding that wall, what were they supposed to have beside them if the enemy attacked? They had a weapon with them, didn't they? Remember when they was building that wall? You look it up in Nehemiah. Nehemiah just didn't say, well, we're just going to pray only, and we're just going to depend on God, did he? He also was practical and told his men to take a weapon. What are you getting at today? I'll tell you what. Nehemiah said, nevertheless, we made our prayer unto our God, and we set a watch against them day and night. Those who responded had weapons in hand. They prayed, they had weapons in hand. When a farmer prays for a crop, what does God expect him to do?
To take care of the crop.
Use the hoe, right? Is a farmer just to pray for his crop and just sit in his farmhouse and watch it all? Is it just going to happen like that? Listen, he's praying he's going to get a good crop. When a farmer prays for a crop, God expects him to say amen with a hoe, to work it, right? I don't just pray about my health. I pray about my health. But what else am I doing? I'm taking the medicine that the doctor prescribed for me every day. You see, I'm still trusting God, but also I'm using the things that are available to us as human beings today. I can't pray that the Lord would just give me money and sit at home, can I? What I need to pray. Or I can't pray that God's going to give me a job. What I need to do. I need to go out and put applications in, right? You see what he's saying here to us today? There's a lot of things that accompany prayer. When I watch St. Jude's always has them commercials about them kids with cancer, and I hate to see that all the time with them kids, children with cancer. But not only should I pray for them kids with cancer, what else do they expect me to do? Send a donation, right? That goes hand in hand. We have to have a careful assessment of what God's goodness is. We have to have a careful assessment of what my part is. If anyone you think would need prayer, do you think Paul would need prayer? One of the most brilliant men, one of the most men who served God with all his heart, soul, and might. Yet the Apostle Paul, what did he ask for? Huh? Pray also for us, he says. Paul needed prayer from others. And the prayer from others led to action. What else did Paul need from others? Not only that they would pray for him, but they would do what? Send him a gift, right? We're not to say to be fed. Run by somebody, say, be fed, be clothed. Not to utter that in prayer, but be willing to back up our prayer with our actions. Can you back up your prayer with your actions? Paul wanted us to be free to act in this way as Christians today. Paul said he was in chains. He didn't want to be in chains, did he? He wanted people to pray for him that he should be set free. Look at verses 5 and 6 as try to finish up today. He says, act wisely towards outsiders, making the most of the time. Let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you should answer each person. How should we walk and how should we talk? We looked at it through the lives of family, employers, and now we look at our relationship to the world today. How does Paul want us to have how does Paul want us to act as far as our relationship is to the world today? He says, act wisely. Consider outsiders. Early Christians were often viewed as with suspicion, distrust, and disdain. You know what the Romans called early Christians? They called them atheists. You know why the Romans called them atheists? Because they did not worship the gods of Rome and Greece. They called Christians unpatriotic because they would not burn incense before the image of the emperor. They called early Christians cannibals. Do you know why they called them cannibals? Because they talked about drinking the blood of Jesus Christ and eating his body. There was a lot of misconceptions that Christians had in the first century. And that's why Paul said the Christian must live a virtuous and impeccable life. Don't live life foolishly as a Christian. Why does he say that? You only have one chance to make the most of your time. Nobody's going to roll back the hands of time in my life and your life today, are they? We only get one chance most of the time to make the most of our lives. Especially when I'm around others. A lot of times I'm only going to get one opportunity. It's for others to see how I act and how I talk. Matter of fact, Paul uses the old cliche that we use all the time. Don't put your foot in your mouth. Be careful when you speak. Act wisely. Let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you should answer each person. We're around a lot of people on the outside in the world we live in today, aren't we? There are a lot of outsiders that we are around today. And how are we to communicate with the world today? It should be the same way that Paul admonished us. The same way we should treat our spouses and our children and our employees and our employers. Relationships involve walking and talking in the world in which we live today. The way we act and communicate. How do we treat those in our sphere of this world in which we live in today? Paul said we need to do so wisely, because a lot of times we won't get a second chance. So let's remember these things when we talk about the Christian's relationship in the family and in the world today. Let's be wise as Paul would admonish us today. Thank you for being here. Let's go to the Lord in word of prayer. Brother Jerry leads us in a word of prayer today.